So next I want to fill in what my function is going to do. So I've already defined how many inputs my function is going to have. I'm going to have 4 inputs now. And with those 4 inputs, I'm going to return a vector containing 3 outputs. So I'm just going to make up something now. Let me say y1 is equal to x1 plus x2. Let me say that y2 is equal to y1 times x3, and y3 is equal to, I don't know, y2 minus y1. Okay, so what I've done is within my function, between the function, the first line, and the end on the last line, all of the code between those 2 lines is what defines my function in terms of how it will operate on the inputs and the outputs. Whoops, and actually I've missed out x4. So let me say y2, y1 divided by x4. Okay, so now I've created code that defines how x1, x2, x3, and x4 will be used to create the outputs that I want. So I'm going to be returning 3 numbers, y1, y2, y3, and y1 is defined in this way. I'm creating y1 variable to return that is based on the sum of x1 and x2. y2 is going to be y1 times x3, and y3 is going to be another expression involving y2 and y1. So I could put in anything between these lines. I could put in for loops, if statements. It could be 100 lines long. You know, it doesn't have to be just a few lines. Functions could contain other functions as well, and that's how you can start building up complexity with little building blocks. So functions are very much like building blocks for us to isolate pieces of code and to reuse again. So in this case, my function is quite simple, and all I want to do is show the mechanics of it. So right now I've created 3 variables, and these 3 variable names correspond to the output that I want to return. So now I have modified my file. I can see there's a little star here, so I'm just going to save. That saves my function, and now I can start using my function in another separate window. So if I create a new script, I could write clear CLC and then use my function. So maybe let me say I want to run my function. So the terminology is I'm going to call my function. Which means that I'm going to run my function with certain inputs to get some kind of output back. So the way that we do it is we do it just like any other function in MATLAB, and all functions in MATLAB use the round brackets to call. So you write the name of your function, my_function. The round brackets tell MATLAB that now I must call this function, but the function, by definition, by me defining it this way, means that I need to have 4 inputs into my function. So what are the 4 inputs? Let's put in 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to call the function called my_function with 4 inputs, where x1 is going to have the value of 1, x2 is going to have the value of 2, x3 is going to have the value of 3, x4 is going to have the value of 4. So now the next thing for me to do is just to call this function. So I'm going to save this. I'll call this demo. Let me call it function demo. This function demo file is just a way for me to demonstrate me calling the function. It's not a function itself. It doesn't have the function keyword, and in fact I'm clearing everything to set everything up before I run this function. Now when I run it, I get just one answer back. So just one answer back is only the first element of this function. If I want to get back all of the values, my function actually requires me to store 3 numbers. So what I need to do is I need to collect all three numbers, and the way that I do that is, again, I create a vector that's going to hold all of the three numbers. So if I put in square brackets, then what I'm saying is call my function with these four inputs, let the function work out the numbers y1, y2, and y3, and then return them into numbers that I can use. So I'm going to call this num1, num2, num3. So num1 is going to return the value of y1, num2 is going to return the value of y2, and num3 is going to return the value of y3. And so what I've done is I've created three variables that will hold the values of the return outputs from the function that I created. So again, these variables here are used to represent the values that my function will return. So if I save this and run it again, now I get all of the answers that correspond to y1, y2, and y3. So in this case, number 1 has a value of 3, number 2 has a value of 9, and number 3 has a value of 8.25. And if I just check, num1 has a value of 3, and that was because it was the first input plus the second input, and so 1 plus 2 equals 3, so that makes sense. And number 2 has a value of 9, so that was y1, 3 times the third input. Well, that was 3. 3 times 3 is 9. And then I assume that this is correct. So yes, yeah, so my function has been created, and now I can check that it runs properly. And the way that I check it is I just run it, and the way that I run it is that I call this function with round brackets and the number of inputs that my function requires.